James Walton, welcome to the podcast.
Robert, thanks for having me on today, man. I appreciate it.
This should be an interesting conversation. All right. So you're a prepper, right?
Yep. Guilty.
What is a prepper? I've always been fascinated with it. What is it?
It's one of those things where there's a bunch of definitions for a bunch of different people. For me, it was kind of like a doorway into a bunch of skills and practices that I needed to put in place, really to be a better man and a better dad. That didn't really exist in any other sort of niche, you know what I mean? Because there's such a focus on self-reliance and independence in the prepping world that it kind of gave me free rein to jump into all kinds of different things like hunting and blacksmithing and even something as simple as like home maintenance, and then doing this sort of emergency preparedness stuff also, storing food, learning about medical preps and storing things in larger quantities to be able to deal with something like the pandemic in 2020. So it really is like it's a license, and I think it's a license to the civilian class that we don't get because I'm not former military. A lot of people in my world are, but if you're not former military, you don't have a bunch of these prepper skills that are kind of, the tactical ones, the firearms ones, that kind of stuff, the defensive, strategic, security-laden kind of skill sets. And prepping kind of gave me the ability to be like, well, I'm not former military, but I am a prepper, so I can kind of sit down and learn about this stuff, listen to this stuff, meet with these groups of people, do these kinds of trainings. And it just, back in 2011 when I got really into this stuff, it really felt like a way to learn some of the things that I felt like I had to learn,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I definitely want to get into the skills and practices and such. What is the difference between a prepper and a survivalist? Because I hear those sometimes they're kind of interchanged. What's the difference?
Yeah, there's a couple of differences, I'd say. One big one I already mentioned, which is I feel like the John J. Rambo kind of mentality is born out of that sort of former or current military background. You know what I mean? Like you have this sort of edge of learning that you learned through the military, and that sort of mentality is built in. I always felt like there was a militaristic edge to a survivalist, and a lot of the old school survivalists were, they had that former military training. And for a civilian, it just felt like, man, that's a big hump to get over. You know what I mean? To call myself a survivalist with no military background. Prepping, I felt like became, especially when it got onto Nat Geo and people started to see mothers and women, managing food storage and gardening and that kind of stuff. It kind of like sanded the edges of survivalism down a little bit, made it something that maybe the average person could see like, oh, I could do that. Like I can figure out how to do these things in my home that make us more disaster resilient. And it isn't even necessarily built around, as much of the tactical as I thought. So I think the difference is that for sure, that prepping seems to be more open to civilian population, the average person. It's a group that it always felt easier to join with the preppers than kind of with the survivalists.
Yeah. So are you prepping for something or prepping just is it more like insurance, prepping for, to be prepared for a natural disaster, a pandemic, all that?
We probably need to add another term into the pot now also, which is homesteading and urban homesteading, because that's really intertwined. So survivalism and prepping kind of intertwined. One seemed to be more like woods-based. You know what I mean? Survivalism always kind of had that bushcraft element, that making traps in the woods, surviving in the woods, austere. Prepping is definitely way more about surviving in the home, which really lends itself to most disasters because, as we've seen since really 2000 on, we have provable events that have happened where people stay put. They stay put. That's what they do. They bug in, as we call it, and they stay at their house. And the better prepared you are to do that, I think the better prepared you'll be to weather most problems, economic, cataclysmic, terrorist, those kinds of things. I just think being prepared to stay at home, and that's kind of the big difference there. But to build on, so to extend your ability to do that, you start blending in this homesteading and urban homesteading thing, which is now going outside to the garden, maybe having a small coop with chickens that produce eggs. And, I'm sure you've seen all the memes about people who have eggs now are like balling hard because they're not paying whatever it is per dozen. I don't even know what it is per dozen of eggs to buy. But all those, the confluence of those three things is where really what my life is all about. And the other thing is the preparing for concept. After a while, this thing becomes lifestyle. The homesteading aspect of it really makes it lifestyle because now you have other living creatures that are dependent on you to do things every day. So it really becomes less a matter of what am I preparing for and more a matter of, really it's living a way cooler life in many instances. You know what I mean? There's nothing cooler than getting food from out back in this day and age. You know what I mean? When we started, it wasn't as, the general population wasn't so like, chemicals in food, chemicals in this, worried about this and that, the health and wellness. So now it's just like we're kind of luckily positioned ourselves. Well, we didn't really luckily position ourselves, Robert. I think we just kind of took a few steps back from like the radical comfort and convenience of our time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. So how many people are in your family or in your household?
4 total. Myself, 2 kids, my wife.
Okay. Everything goes to crap. How long can you guys last right now?
There's a lot of variables there, but
grocery stores closed down, stores closed down.
I guess our
let's say you still have utilities.
Oh God, water and electricity? Oh man.
You're self-sufficient?
Probably. Water and electricity, we could be fine for, I don't even know. It would all come down to protein would be our biggest challenge. You know what I mean? So once, so we're not allowed to have roosters in the city for one thing, right? I live in the city of Richmond, Virginia, but we would want to get a rooster, before things went totally upended. And we, once you get into chickens, you get to know people who raise chickens, so it's not that hard to get a rooster same day. You know what I mean?
If everything went,
pick up a rooster and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm sure if everything went to crap, you having a rooster would be the last thing.
I guess if it happened immediately, you know what I mean? If it happened immediately, it wouldn't be. But so many things are kind of, you can see them on the horizon. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Are you self-sufficient without electricity as well? Are you solar? And
we have some. We have solar generators and gas generator, but gas is going to run out, and solar's okay until it's not okay anymore. And solar, in all honesty, there is a big market for solar generators nowadays. The biggest struggle we've seen with those things is getting them recharged once you use them all up, depending on what kind of wattage you have in solar panels. Because there are days with limited sun, there are days with no sun. And when there are days, really frankly, from my experience, when there are days with limited sun, you're not doing a lot of charging. And if you're planning on using something like the one that we have, then, you're really not going to get much out of the charge.
So you talk about, what you guys have there. What all do you have? Obviously you have chickens. What else? You're in the city.
Yeah.
But you're in the city of Richmond. But you're not on a half-acre lot or a quarter-acre lot. What are you on? How much land?
Well, our entire lot is actually 0.8 of an acre. That's home and everything.
Okay.
So the yard is not, and I expanded the yard. It was mostly woods. And over the years, we've added probably like 5 to 10 different perennial food-producing plants, fruit trees and raspberries and gooseberries and kiwis, and we're lucky enough to have this tropical fruit that grows. It really grows everywhere, but nobody really knows about it. It's called the pawpaw, and we've got a ton of those on our property already. And then we do some gardening, and we do some neighbor gardening, and we created a community garden up the street with the help of a bunch of neighbors who really do all the managing of it now. So from the produce and stuff perspective, that's kind of where we're at with that. We've got chickens that produce eggs every day. We're playing around with quail right now, and I don't know. It's not really doing as well as some of my other friends are doing with them, so I'm sure it's user error for sure, but that's one of those things. Because of where we live, we've got a lot of development around us, so we've got like herds of deer. You were talking about the deer in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
We're in a similar boat. We're in like daytime deer situation. Where
wow.
they're just walking around in the daytime. Now, I don't really count them as like legitimate long-term food source because anything could happen to them. But as far as captive food and stuff like that, and then we do a lot of food storage, DIY homemade food storage, not ready hour, not any of those prepackaged foods, because we cook almost every night, and to me those things they solve a problem, but they're not really that great. They don't taste that great. Their protein content is kind of like non-existent. So we don't put a lot of money into those pre-made survival food kits. We do a lot of shelf-stable, dry goods in Mylar bags, oxygen absorbers, that kind of setup in 5-gallon buckets that are protected for the the long haul. Rice, beans, pasta, flour, those kind of base ingredients that we can do a lot with. And, that, to be honest with you, when we started putting away food storage, that felt better to me than almost anything we've ever done related to prepping.
Really?
Yeah, it really did. Better than any kind of gun, any kind of training class, any of
Just
that.
that security?
Yeah, something about it, man. I remember I was in my living room and I think it was flour because it was all over the floor. We were just bagging up a big 25-pound bag of flour, me and my youngest son, and I think at the time he was probably like 4 or 5. And, all you're doing is taking it from a paper bag to a Mylar bag with a coffee mug. And he was having fun because he's spilling it all over the floor and, laughing about it and all that stuff. And I remember just sitting there looking at him being like, if nothing else, this kid is going to eat. It's just it's that sort of father provider, I guess.
Provider, protector, and provider. Yeah.
You get that feeling of like we'll eat. If nothing else goes right, we know that this goes right. I was a chef in a past life, so the cooking thing is like it's a given. You know what I mean? So it's,
no, I do, and it's we talked about this before. Even teaching my sons at an early age how to fish and how to hunt.
Oh yeah,
and how to clean, whether it's fish or animals, and just knowing, could they survive on this for a little while? Yeah, they could. Knowing that there is some, but I mean, you've taken it definitely a step further with it. How did you get into this? Like, have you always, as a kid, wanted to get into it, or what?
No, radical inadequacies, basically.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It was just met a great girl when I was really young, and it was one of those situations where it was like, you can marry her or you can be young, but if you don't marry her, you're probably never going to meet anyone like her again, and you're probably going to think about it for the rest of your life, just knowing the type of guy that I am.
Yeah.
And so I was already sort of musically inclined. I was a musician in a band. I didn't play sports. I didn't do a lot of traditionally I don't know what it would be. Not necessarily traditionally male, because it was all male, but traditionally sort of masculine things, I guess, right? My dad was a painter, but he never wanted me to come to work and paint with him because he didn't want me to become a painter.
Okay.
So I didn't learn a lot of that stuff. And by the time, we just started living life, then we were in love, living life, having the greatest
old were
time.
you?
I met her when I was 17.
Wow.
So we just were having a ball, 17, 18, 19, moving in together, all the stuff. We were married by 22. I was 22 when we got married. And all of a sudden, like, I had a wife and then we had a kid. And everything that I hadn't learned, hadn't done, all the things that I kind of pretended I didn't need to know,
right,
just came all at once. And it was during Hurricane Irene here in Richmond.
Yeah.
And there's no horror story, but it was just more of a horror realization. I was holding my kid and he was like 2 months old or something. And looking out my back window of my kitchen, and the trees are like and I grew up in Philly, so we never get hurricanes. I never
Right.
seen the trees bend in wind for like 3 days at a time.
Yep.
And I was just like, oh God, man, I got a lot to do to get prepared. Like when we moved in our house, Robert, my father-in-law gave me like the first hammer I ever had. You know what I
Really?
mean? Like that's
Yeah.
how, that's where I was at. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, what prepping really did for me was gave me sort of like an easy doorway into all of the stuff I needed to learn. Like all of a sudden,
Yeah.
I had a reason to learn self-defense and a reason to learn home maintenance and a group that I could talk to that was doing the same things. You know, it wasn't like, oh, I got to go find a home maintenance group or buy a boring home maintenance book and read it word for word. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And all that kind of stuff. So it became a really cool kind of group activity, and a good little tribe to join to learn all that stuff for me.
Yeah. So I guess it was that vulnerability
Oh, definitely,
during the hurricane that kind of set you on this quest.
yeah. Well, I mean, it was
And just
lingering.
one thing building on another.
Yeah, it was lingering most of my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I never really knew how to fight. Never got in many fights. Ran from a lot of altercations. So it was always in the back of my head, like one day you're gonna have to learn this stuff, dude, or life's gonna get weird. And it all did really come to a head then. You know, a lot of things were coming to a head at that moment, though. As you remember, you know, when you have kids, it's like all your inadequacies are laid out on the table before you.
Absolutely.
And you're like, oof, I might want to handle some of this before they get too old.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You talk about the network. Is there a pretty big network? I know you have a podcast as well and, you know, large following on Instagram.
I mean, you know, it all depends on the who's willing to admit it and not.
Yeah.
But over the years, we've built a really big network of people. I started, like, I jumped right into podcasting. Like, I went like, maybe I should be a prepper. And then I started listening to this podcast network called the Prepper Podcast Radio Network back in 2011. And they ran a commercial. And the commercial was like, do you want to be a host? And you don't, you know, and it was literally like just some guy I called, great guy, the guy who used to own the Prepper Broadcasting Network. And he just had me on. And I just took sort of the neophyte beginners angle, like 100% honest with the audience. I don't know what I'm doing. And it was just great. I mean, the people were great. The things I didn't know, they'd email me about and be like, hey, do it this way, you know, whatever, that kind of thing. And it was like a fast track. It was really great. And then, you know, all these years later, naturally, you know what it is to stay in any business long. You just naturally build a network of close people, you know, people outside of that network. And, you know, then, of course, there's audience on top of that. So in our little world, yeah, we know a lot of preppers for sure.
You know, and it's interesting, too. You said 0.8 acres.
Yeah.
So less than an acre. I always thought, you know, you would need a minimum 6 to 8 acres, you know, preferably 10 or more
Well,
to be a prepper. But you don't.
No way. I like to refer to my buddy Dave Jones, the NBC guy, who is a really fun guy to have on if you ever want me to connect you.
Yeah.
He's a lifetime military guy who basically his job was to figure out how to best use the nuclear bombs back in the 80s, early 90s. He was nuclear, biological, chemical warfare sort of, you know, mastermind. Mm-hmm. And but he's the nicest dude in the world. You would never believe it. If somebody told you who he was and what he did, you'd be like, that's not true. Can't be. He's too nice. But anyway, I always refer to him because he lives on a homestead in Northern Virginia. And I'd say he uses, and when I say a homestead, I'm talking about a family that meat and everything could probably go years before they would need anything. You know what I mean? In terms of sustenance. And he works probably about 1.5 acres to 2 acres.
Really?
He has more land than that, but what he works and what he gets to every day in terms of like weeding and feeding and that kind of stuff, probably 1 acre to 1.5 acres. So it's, you know, it really comes down to what you prioritize. His house is surrounded by gardens. He's, you know what I mean? He's got gardens in the front and in the back. Yeah, it all depends. You know, if you have a lawn out front and you want it to be a lawn, then you just have to barter with the fact that that all could be food too. but instead it's a
That's
lawn.
a good point.
You know what I mean?
You can make it part of your landscaping.
Oh, definitely.
Fruit trees
Yeah.
with the different things like that.
Yep.
You know, that's so interesting because I would have thought, I just would have thought it would have been more with that, that it would have taken more, but that's good to know.
And you know, strictly from the prep side too, Rob, you could do canned meats and dried foods and have no yard and be able to sustain yourself for a real long time, just if you had the storage space to do it. You know what I mean? With canned foods, dry goods, like I was talking about, packing them long term, and lots of canned meats. You know, you could.
How old were you when Y2K happened?
I was born in '86, so I'd have been, 14.
14 years old or so. Yeah. Was your family, because I know, I'm thinking of some people I know, and I remember going in their garage, and they had
I knew a family like that.
hundreds of gallons of, jugs of water
Yeah.
and, big 5-gallon buckets of food and all this stuff because they just knew, everything was going to, because a lot of people were saying that electricity the grid might go down,
Oh,
to
sure.
this, to that. Was your family into that at all or not? No.
No.
So this really did. I mean, it really was, the hurricane was like, hey, this is a big vulnerability on my part. I need to kind of step it up and be able to protect and provide for my family.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, well, I always loved sort of apocalyptic film and TV and that kind of stuff. So I think there was also like a moment when the more I got into it, the more I started researching it and that kind of thing, economic collapses around the world, I started to realize like this stuff could potentially happen, and it's like worst outcomes, and then you start learning about, the history of the 20th century, mid 20th century, and it's like, oh, this can get like so bad you can't even wrap your head around it.
So when COVID hit, grocery stores were closing, all of that.
Yeah.
Are running out, stuff was running out on the shelves. Were y'all just sitting back like, we got this?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. It was, we were actually we had a heads up too, because we were on it early. There's a couple, Dr. Bones and Nurse Amy is their name. They're long time players in the prepping medical world. And I want to say it was like early January, they released a podcast on our network. They don't do a podcast on our network anymore. I probably should reach out to them. But it was like new pneumonias in China or something like that. And this is when they were just first sort of getting news about something weird's happening in China. And then Dave Jones, the NBC guy, being the biological warfare expert, as we got more data and stuff like that, he started to go like, this doesn't seem like it's something that's going to go away quick. And we were doing a weekly podcast, I think by February, every Monday on it. It was called the Corona Cast at first because it was coronavirus before it was COVID. Yeah. And then we were just, going over it all, telling people what they should be doing and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I'll tell you one thing we did, Robert, that I encourage parents to do, because my kid wound up missing like a year and a half of in school here in Richmond. We had a crazy governor who would just shut school down forever. And I bought curriculum, really affordable curriculum off Amazon.com back in probably February, I think it was, of 2020 for that reason, like just in case.
Really?
Yeah, and it was because, once they were started talking about people are wearing masks, don't wear the masks, then wear the masks, it was like, oh no, nobody knows what they're doing yet. And this could, this is going to go downhill quick. So it was something like, for the audience, I think it was called 180 Days of Blank. And they have it for every grade, and they have it for every subject. So we had like 180 days of science, 180 days of English, 180 days of math for third grade.
Age appropriate, like for whatever grade level it is?
And it was learning and worksheets and activities and all that kind of stuff. And it was one of those preps that never crossed my mind in a million years. And I didn't even really need them that much. I used them as supplement because their online school wasn't great. You know what I mean? Like public school online, as you can imagine, wasn't phenomenal.
Oh, I know.
But it was it was one of those things that we did buy right there at the moment of go, and I'm really glad that we did. We didn't have it waiting. It wasn't part of our prepper plans, But for the most part, we were relatively comfortable. We're a go outside and do stuff family too, though. So we
That's
suffered that.
yeah,
We suffered that a little bit. Not too much though. We did go to Legoland that year for real cheap.
did you?
Thanks to my
Yeah,
wife.
we so for my boys, when all that hit, they did have virtual school. And,
Yeah.
so I think it was in April when they finally shut down the schools, the 1st of April, somewhere around then. And then they came on virtual for a couple months. And, it was kind of shut down for like a week.
Yeah.
And they, had it virtual for a couple months through the end of the year. And there wasn't a lot that was going on. The next year, I believe it was all virtual then.
Yep. Same here. Same here.
But I had told the boys early on, and I will give them credit. I mean, the school district did have their act together when they started back the next school year, but it wasn't the same. But they did have it more together, and they were learning, and some, not as much as if they were in person. But I had told the boys, you're not going to take this time to, and I've talked about it on here before. You're not going to take this time just to kind of get better on your tablets with certain games and everything
Sure.
else. I mean, this is the time physically you're going to get stronger and faster. So we're going to exercise. We're going to do different things. We're going to be outside, and mentally your intelligence is going to improve. So even though they had their school assignments, they still had reading assignments from dad
Right.
that they had to do. There was also, I cannot remember the name of it, but the school had actually put out a couple but they pointed you in the direction of a few websites for math. And, I had them doing that as well, just because I'm like, this is when it's going to kind of separate
Oh yeah. No, you're right.
the people. And I've even, and they were around some friends. They had some, so they still got that. But man, that was such a it was such a harmful time for kids. And I see kids now even that are having a hard time adjusting, whether it's socially or even education wise.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure there's
being
a
able to
gap
pick stuff
that
up
people
at
will
school.
They'll just never fill that gap. I'm sure there's some kids because if you're in one of those tough math times, that's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough to fill that gap. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I didn't do anything with science. I don't like science. And I just thought, you know what? I want them to. I thought with reading, that improves. Will improve their vocabulary and will stimulate their brain.
Sure,
and then math, they can. If they can keep up with those two things, they'll be fine, and everything else we can kind of fill in. So
Yeah.
crazy times. So you were talking about the kids. How involved are they in this lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, they like I said, as far as it being a lifestyle, it's their life. You know what I mean? Like, I'm their dad. So as much as what you do in your life affects your kids, it's just their life. They've never known the backyard without like food in it. They'd never known a backyard that didn't have like chickens flocking through it. You know what I mean? And we're always on the mentality is always there that, when my son was first sort of finding out, still going to school and sort of finding out about COVID and what was going on and wrapping his head around things are closing, school is closing, other things are closing. Like he said to me, we'll be okay because we have extra food, right? So he, it's all built in there, you know what I mean? And they don't have like prep or specific tasks or anything that they do. There's no like program, you know what I mean, that they're on.
Right.
They do what kids do.
But they have no problem going out in the backyard, gathering eggs and that type.
Oh yeah, they can start fires and all that stuff. But like I said, you're a hunter and your kids can hunt because that's what you do. You know what I mean? So all those things, they just pick them up from being around me, and that kind of thing. So it's like I said, if you didn't know what I did and you saw them in a social setting, you'd be like, oh, they're just normal kids. You wouldn't be like, oh, they're the survivalist kids. They've got like loincloths on and ferro rods hanging from their necks. You know what I mean? Like it's nothing extreme. But Well, I'll tell you one thing that my kids, I think, have that a lot of kids don't anymore is a sense of safety and well-being, even in bad times. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
a sense that this is what this crazy dude spends all his time on, and so we're going to be all right. And he's got plans, and when things go wrong, we know what to do. So
I think it gives them that confidence. It gives them that confidence, that self-sufficient, feeling that I've seen it with my boys with, again, going back, as you were saying, going back to hunting, that we could be okay.
yeah, they
I mean,
understand.
at least for a little while. I mean, you talk about with the pandemic when the grocery stores and all that craziness was going on. Fortunately, we had a pretty successful year deer hunting, and
You guys had meat, and the kids
we
knew
had
it.
plenty of meat. We had deer meat. We had quail meat, and the boys and I were even talking, and I said, yeah, we've got the protein. I said you might not have vegetables, and they were like, oh, like they could care less about the vegetables.
Right.
And as long as they had meat, they thought they were fine, and somewhat they were. But I do think that's pretty cool with the kids. And what have you learned through this as a father?
Oh, yeah. Well, when you focus on the things that we focus on all the time, death is always like, looming. You know what I mean? It's just you follow everything out to the end, economic collapse, whatever kind of thing that we do, or talking about or preparing for, that week on the network. And I think it's good to stay pretty close to the Grim Reaper, because he's a good reminder of what it is you stand to miss today. Like if it all ended today, where would your head be at? What would you be thinking of? You like, what should I have done more of? What should I spend more time on?
Do you think about that a lot? Because I do.
Oh, it's my whole life is governed off of that thought.
Yeah.
Literally. Like when I made this jump into freelance writing and podcasting, it was not 100%, but probably 80 to 90% on the idea that like, oh, I can make a living, because I was a chef. So the idea of making a living like out of the house was unheard of. You know what I
Right.
mean? And when I realized that there was a niche here, it was valuable, we could pay the bills and do it. I started to realize like, oh, I can like seriously maximize my time with my kids. Like I could be with my kids in summer break all the time, and being a writer really lends itself to that, because you can be like, I'll finish this later. I'm not in a meeting with somebody. I'm not like,
Right.
having to talk to people immediately at that moment. So it became a serious motivating factor in all of it, and it changed my life, having been in that other job compared to this world of podcasting and writing would have been a totally different adventure for a father. I mean, totally different. The amount of time spent together would have been way less. You know what I mean? And there's just
No, I do.
there's
I
something
do.
about that started to become a driving force for me. And then a lot more build off of that. I started thinking about like sort of that 0 to 10-year-old age frame. You know what I mean? Because it felt like sort of after 10, you'd be able to speak to this better than me, because I only have one after 10. But after 10 is like, the ships begin to part ways. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the outside world becomes a little more appealing than the inside one, especially with boys. And so I just thought, if I can maximize that, that'll be pretty good life for both parties.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do, not to sound all dark, but I do think about death a lot. I think, part of that is I lost my dad when I was 10. And he did teach me a lot. But with my boys being 16 and 14, I think about that a lot. What do I want them to learn? Now, there's a lot with morals and values and all of that, right? And, the other basics and, being a good person and, getting a good education, hopefully, being able to provide one day. There's all of that. But there is a big part of me with, again, part of why I got them into hunting and fishing and outdoors early on was, and I'm not, you were talking about doomsday. I'm not like thinking about, oh, there's going to be apocalypse, so it's doomsday one day. I don't really think about it that way, but I do think if shit did hit the fan, you know, could you survive? Like, I don't want you to be dependent on anything.
Right.
And could you survive? Now, I haven't taught them the gardening and everything else, but I kind of take it of, you know, I kind of look at it like if it did, okay, so you need to gather a little village. You know, okay, you can gather the protein. Hopefully somebody else can, can be responsible for the vegetables. Hopefully you have somebody on your team or in the neighborhood or in your group that can provide medical care, you know, and then you kind of, yeah, then you can kind of, instead of them all doing it, you know, doing one thing. But, man, I think about that a lot. And I'm always writing down stuff. Like, have I told them about this yet? Have I told them about that?
Yeah.
I need to, I've already thought about things during the summer that I need to. And I had them both driving. I taught them how to drive early.
Yeah, I think that's a good move.
Like early.
I think a lot of things early is pretty good.
I mean, I grew up, I don't want to say a rural community. I mean, but it was, there were areas where it was. I mean, there was probably 60,000 people in the town. Where my grandmother lived was really small. And, everybody knew everybody and everybody knew everybody's business and then some. and she had me driving 11 or 12.
Yeah, I believe it. Sure.
She had me driving early. But so I think it was probably around 13. Both boys knew how to drive. Part of that was based on the fact, too, going back to hunting, if we were in a deer stand, say I fell, say I got hurt.
Yeah.
I wanted somebody to be able to, go out to the vehicle and be able to drive back to camp and, hey, Dad needs help or whatever it may be.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
But a lot of things. That's interesting. As I talk to different dads, it's interesting the ones who, I never think about it. I just kind of live day by day. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could have that. And I do think about it a lot, as to if I was to die tomorrow, what have I taught the boys everything? And if not, what else do they need to learn?
I think it's important also for, your understanding the value in all the things in your life, like your marriage and all that. Like,
absolutely.
Nobody's ready to go.
No.
And if you're not ready to go, then there's a reason,
Yeah.
And some people, I think, need that reminder.
Yeah.
It's like there is a limited amount of time. One of the things that really changed my life, Robert, was listening to, Jesse Itzler.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, yeah.
Well, he started, this is probably 10 years ago, too. It was a really formative time for me. But he started breaking his life down instead of into years, into the events, into the quantity of events, like the amount of times. Like for you, it would be, a good one for you would be, not how many more years do you have with your kids, how many more hunting camps will you set up with your boys? Together. And when he started breaking that down, I started applying it to everything. You know what I mean? Like, because that's the real way to look at life. Like, how many more times are you really going to do this thing? And it makes me like a big baby, and I hide and cry a lot over it because... And I can see you're on the verge of it now yourself.
Look, we had that discussion last time we went hunting.
Oh, there you go.
Every time we go, I want to do at least one hunt where we all three sit together.
Yeah.
Very rarely will we kill anything then, because a lot of times it's just, we'll see stuff, but not as much as if somebody's sitting solo or I'm sitting with one of them.
Yeah.
Because the jokes start happening.
Oh, yeah.
And being quiet doesn't happen as much. Yeah. And somehow I got brought up. I'm like, you know what? I really enjoy these times. And we were leaving. And I said, we probably don't have many of these left. And they're like, what do you mean? Well, you're going to be in college in a few years. And, a couple of years after that, you'll both be in college. You're going to have your own life.
Definitely.
And then right after that, you're going to be out working. Schedules aren't going to align. You're going to have families. And the look on, and while I was getting sad, I looked at them as we were driving away, and the look on their faces, it was like, oh no.
Yeah.
They didn't realize it even. And so then I quickly changed the subject, and I did say, well, look, one of them brought it back up later on and kind of wanted to touch on it. Like, oh, Dad, we can always do this. We'll always find a way. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, we will, and we can, but I'm just telling you the way life is, and that's okay,
Oh, that's life. Yeah.
and just, well, that's why we need to enjoy every time we do, because you don't know, you don't know how much time's left. That's great though. I'm definitely going to have to listen and to break that down.
If you apply that, I'm telling you, to all your favorite things, you know what I mean, then very quickly you will. It's impossible not to develop that sort of deep gratitude for. And when you meet preppers, like real ones who do it a lot and are really dedicated to it, you meet the type of people who get all this stuff. Like we go to an event every year called Prepper Camp in North Carolina. It's a blast. There's like 65 classes a day at this thing. Some of the best, survivalist preppers, ex-military guys out there. And we go there and we learn and we set up booths and talk about the network and, hang out after the event. It's at a campground, so everybody's camping. You go campsite to campsite, just meet your people. The people there, like the people that make up the crowd, and it's something like 2,000 or 3,000 people every year. That group of people, they get it. You know what I mean? There is something about it.
Yeah, very grounded people.
There's an understanding of the value of life in the prepping community, or else you wouldn't do it. You know what I mean? Why go through all this stuff? Why learn all this stuff? Do all this stuff if you didn't value life so much? If you didn't appreciate it?
It's definitely something I have been interested in. It seems like, and we talked about this, as days pass, I get even more interested in it at times. I think I would, if it wasn't for the boys, I'd be completely, I would take a step or 3 or 4 or 5 further than you. I talked about this with you. There are times when I would love to have several acres, live right in the middle of it, disconnect, live off the grid. Not that I'm trying to hide from anybody, but just unplug, just everything in society going on, and just all of that. Have a big gate up front, and not let people in. Maybe even a moat, if I could, around the whole property. That's where I find it so appealing. With that, but that's not what I know. That's not what prepping is. But that would be, I think, where I could actually find some peace there. Because man, with society today, it's crazy.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I mean, if you can just unplug from the phone and the computer, because you go hunt. But that is really the fire hose of chaos. You know what I mean? You turn those two things off in your life for 48 hours, and it's like, oh yeah, this is actually real life. Because for the most part, you're not like, I mean, I don't know your day-to-day lifestyle, but most people aren't wading through headlines on their way to and from work. We just turn the radio on, turn the phone on, turn the podcast on, turn whatever, and then we get bombarded, which is kind of horrible, but it's also really great because you can just drive to work in the silence.
James, I did that. I had a time, it's probably in the fall. It was right before the election, or a month or 2 or 3 before the election.
Oh yeah. Real noisy.
And I don't want to say I was in a dark place, because that's not correct, but I was
overwhelmed,
very overwhelmed with all the negativity and just everything. And just my thought processes seemed so skewed in ways, and just, I'm like, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not doing anymore. I, didn't look at Twitter or X. I did still do the podcast some, not as much. Instagram, I would go on there and scroll real quick, but even some of my favorite podcasts, I just got off those, because it was, and literally
you need it.
All my habits of, whether it's going to work and coming back and listening to certain podcasts, whether it's at the gym and in between sets, flipping through Twitter, and, I was just getting bombarded so much. It's like, I've got to step away.
Yeah.
I have to.
Well, I think what people don't get about it is you're not getting what you want. You're getting what you think you want. You know what I mean? Like every time you flip the phone open, you're getting stuff, and you think, well, it's my phone, so I'm getting the stuff that I want to get. And then when you reach the point that you reach, it's like you realize I'm getting whatever the algorithm tells me. Like I'm being
You're getting what they
brainwashed
want.
here.
You're getting what they want you to
Yeah,
get.
exactly. That's it. So then, people who are aware, like yourself, you get to the point where you're like, all right, I need a break. This is insane.
Yeah. It was just it was too much. And I did for probably a couple months. I'm just like, I'm done.
Yeah.
I can't.
The catch-22 though, Robert, is who, and this takes practice that you have from hunting, but there's not a lot of people in the population who can sit quietly by themselves for extended periods of time. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
So they try to, I think they try to do this sort of digital fasting, and then they find out like, oh, I got to stay busy. Like I can't just sit here and enjoy life. I need something to do. I need a place to go. I need something to listen to, a song, anything, because sitting here in the quiet is as brutal as sitting with, some political jabber in my ear.
I love it. I love it. And you know what I have found is now, even though I don't feel bombarded and all that noise, I find now going to work, from work, wherever I may be going to, probably more than half the time, I don't have anything on in the car. No music. I was never like that before. No podcast, nothing.
Yeah,
and
you
it's
need it.
literally in silence. And with the boys, when they're in the car with me, a lot of times I don't then, and which always is great. One of them will try to turn some music on sometimes, but that's rare because it usually leads to better conversations too.
Oh,
but
definitely.
I had to disconnect from all that, and that kind of, you can only imagine then I was really longing for 50 to 100 acres in the middle of the woods and, at the end of a dirt road and getting in there and just getting away from it all.
Yeah. And all you had to, it's crazy because that period of time in America every 4 years is so insane. And your sole duty is to vote. You know what I mean? And you have to get beaten about the head and neck constantly for a year prior. And you're like, all I got to do is go in and pull a lever, sign a document thing, scratch a box in, and I just got to hear this for. It's a nightmare.
It's just too much.
It is.
I love what you're doing. It is off the norm of what I generally discuss. I mean, I've kind of gone in a lot of different directions with it, and this is definitely in a completely different direction. It's something that I do find appealing, and I want to talk to people about it. But I want to know more. I want to know. What have you, if there's one or two things you've learned about yourself, truly learned about yourself with this, with taking the prepper lifestyle, what is that?
Well, I'll give you the cocky one first. And it just is what it is. It's been proven, you know what I mean? From going from where I was to where I am now, it's like, and I don't think it's unique to me. I think it's unique to anybody, but I just feel like there's nothing in the world that I couldn't do. You know what I mean?
What a great feeling.
In terms of, and this also comes from having kids. Like I've been super hands-on with kids, and my kids have done things. Like I said, I wasn't a sporty guy, but my kids have done things in sports, and my kids have done things with computers and video game systems that if you said to me like my one son is really into modifying video games, like the systems themselves, and he's very young. Wow. He's like just, he's 9, so he's been doing it for probably 3 years. And we're literally taking cards, putting them into computers, putting code on them, pulling it out, put it in the system, do something, to pull it out, put it in. And between having the kids and really setting them free on what they're passionate about, like, this is what you want to do, let's do it, right? Even if that means we're going to throw football for an hour and a half today, and that might be some dad's dreams, but for me, I mean, it's still a wonderful time, don't get me wrong, but my one son, that's his life. Like, let's go throw, and I'm not even that good at throwing. I've gotten way better at throwing because of it, you know what I mean? But anyway, you get into this habit of like, okay, we're going to do this thing, this is how we do the thing, it's really foreign, you're not comfortable with it at all, and then you do it. And then years go by and you look back and you're like, well, I did that. And there it is. There's a proof it worked. You know what I mean? And that happens like enough times, particularly for a guy like me who had a handful of skills. I was good at them, but it was only a handful. It happens enough times to where you go like, like if I got instruction and if I can identify the tools and get my hands on the right tools, like I don't feel like there's anything I couldn't figure out and do. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I don't know if everybody feels that way or not, but I never felt that way in my life. And that was one of the biggest takeaways was like, damn.
So it's that confidence through discipline. Is that correct?
Confidence through discipline, but also confidence through sort of like the resume. You know what I mean? Like where we started and where we're at now, and all the things that we literally did with our own hands and brains. You know, and things that you stood in front of and were like, you want to do what with your computer? Like, I don't have any idea how we could even start doing that. You know what I mean? And then being on the other side of it and being like, oh, we did it. You know? Yeah.
No, that's No, that's incredible. That I just, you talk about the different things, whether it's self-defense and being able to healthily sustain your family.
Yeah.
It is so appealing, and it is rewarding to have that feeling that, yes, I can protect, I can provide, and I'm passing on these things to my kids as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge one, self-defense is one of the biggest ones for me.
Yeah. Because
what came with learning how to fight and carrying a gun all the time was a sense of relaxation that I never had in my life either.
Yeah.
All the time I was always anxious. I was always like, I didn't like walk up into a group of guys and be like, oh God, what if we all get in a fight? You know what I mean? But there was always this weird anxiety because I didn't know how to fight.
Yeah.
And, I trained at a local MMA gym for like maybe a year, something like that, year and a half, and kept, carried that on for the rest of my life with heavy bags and that kind of training and stuff. And it just, then after 2017, the London Bridge, I don't know if you remember the UK London Bridge attack. It was a major event in my life.
Yep.
Didn't affect me whatsoever, but it affected me in huge ways because there was a family that was cornered in a store and stabbed to death. And I was like, I'm going to carry a gun from now on because we're never going to be cornered in a store and stabbed to death. You know what I mean? Not in America, not with the Second Amendment. So
I'm with you.
Those things really freed me. It's not a weight. It didn't become a weight of like, oh, great, now I'm a protector and I have to do this thing every day and remember this thing every day. It really became like that there was some kind of weird anxiety that existed there that was, if things go down, you're not ready. If things get crazy, and things get crazy, if they get crazy, you're not ready. So hope you can figure it out on the fly, And when all that went away, it just became like, okay, So much of prepping is like that. Just like I've been talking about prepping as anti-anxiety for a lot of 2025.
It's that peace, right?
Yes.
It's that peace that you have.
Exactly.
It gives you that confidence, but also that peace is a big part of it. That peace that, I'm not going to be trapped in a corner. My family is not going to be trapped in a corner.
Right. Never.
They're going to have to go through me.
Yeah. Not just
before
me.
they get to my family.
Not just me. Hot lead on top of that,
Yeah. No, I get it. I mean, look, it got very crazy here in Atlanta for a while.
Yeah.
And very crazy. The boys, they maybe knew 2% of the time when I was carrying. I think they've asked before, why? And it's to protect us. You never know. Hopefully I never, ever, ever have to use it. But you know what? If Dad does, you'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it becomes a no-brainer,
Yeah.
After a while. It is scary at first. Carrying a weapon is scary at first, but it's one of those things where, like, we're, 2017, so been at it a while, and it's just, again, it's the lifestyle,
It all goes back to, of course, with carrying, it's not, and let's say this, it's not just, hey, go to your store, buy a gun, and carry.
Yeah.
It's the training that goes along with it, and it is, I had, during the time I'm talking about when rioting was going on, I had a friend who talked to me about if he should carry.
Mm-hmm.
I told him no. He's like, what? I'm like, no, you would do more harm if you did.
It's
how
possible.
often?
Yeah.
How often have you shot that gun? I don't know. I got it like 10 years ago. I mean, maybe once or twice.
Jeez.
You know, where is it? Well, it's up in the top of the closet in the hallway. And I'm like, he was in such a state of, his thing was that he was in such a state of fear.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
That my problem with him carrying was.
He's just going to pull it out.
Yes. Yes.
Because he's
correct.
Afraid. Yeah.
Yes.
An altercation that might not even be an altercation could get kinetic in a hurry.
Yes.
And
that's where I said you would do more danger. And, I was giving him many of instances. There was a time when I was going into a department store and these guys, I don't know what they call it, like a dash and robbery or whatever, it was a big group of young men who they weren't even young men. Let me back it up. Because one of them and I looked each other dead in the eyes, and the kid was probably 12, 13 years old.
Oh.
But they went in, and I literally was walking in the department store when they were running out just loads of clothes.
Yeah.
I'm carrying. I never saw a gun. I never felt threatened. But my point was somebody like him
maybe pulls a gun. Yeah.
would have pulled it out, and it would have escalated in a whole different direction, and it didn't need to be.
And I'm sure that pulling a gun in Atlanta is probably hefty repercussions for that.
Yes. But it is. And, but I think I agree with you, but training has to go along with it. And, it definitely does. I think it's so cool with what you're doing. I really do. And I think it's, it has made me think, like, do I need to have a little garden? Do I need to start doing this? I mean, it's
yeah, you do. Definitely.
It's
better
too.
Is. It's just better. There's nothing like gardening growing up was a thing that we did long before we ever worried about anything happening. My parents, like I said, they didn't worry about that. They were worried about rent. You know what I mean? That was their apocalypse, was like the first of the month. But they always had gardens because the food was better. We'd eat the tomatoes and be like, man, the tomatoes are like way better than in the supermarket.
Oh, they're so much better.
Yeah.
Everything, the blueberries, everything are just, everything's so much better. It really is.
But all that said, though, Robert, I do sympathize with the average person. You know what I mean? In the sense that who can manage it all? Who can deal with, thinking about what could and might and may happen, and how do I prepare for it? Like, I know life is busy. Life is crazy. Here you are working full time, doing a podcast, got 2 kids. Like, people are busy. So this idea that they're going to dedicate themselves to this on top of everything and whatever other hobbies they have or responsibilities outside of all of that. So, I get it. I also get it. So we try to make it as easy as possible.
And just mix it in your lifestyle. You don't have to go full prep and go buy a bunch of chickens and start planting a garden. You can do a few chickens or a few rows of plants and just kind of ease into it that way.
I'm 10 years in. You don't jump a decade in right off the bat, or you'll probably just lose a bunch of money. So
yeah. It's like another friend of mine. I know they started off with little buckets of tomato plants out on their patio. And, and I saw that grow to the next year. It was several more buckets, and they had tomato plants, and I don't know what else they had. Now you go in their backyard, and they've got a few rows that they have raised gardens and a few rows, and they have some blueberry bushes. They have different things in their yard. And it's like, wow, this thing escalated in a good way. But man, I tell you what, the stuff that comes from their house is delicious.
Of course.
I'm fortunate to be able to share on that. So,
well, you got your gardener in the group.
Yeah. There you go. There we go. I didn't even think about coming. You're right, though. Yeah. There you go. Hey, so how do people find you?
I mean, the best way is preparedbroadcasting.com. Our podcast network. We put out podcasts every day. There's 13 of us.
Every day.
Every day there's a show. Yeah.
Okay.
Every day. There's 13 hosts on our network. And so you won't get just James's journey and all this. You'll get Carl B's journey. You'll get Jordan Ferguson's journey. Dave Jones, the NBC guy, as I talked about, is, a bunch of hosts. And they all do it a little differently. They all do it in a different part of the country, which adds its own challenges and its own flavor. And you can hear it all at prepperbroadcasting.com. Or, you don't even have to go to our website. We're on Spotify. We're on everywhere podcasts are. Our network is. So the Prepper Broadcasting Network is what you're looking for. And I don't think there's a network out there that has 13 hosts all in the prepping and homesteading vein. So it's pretty unique, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like it. You're on Instagram as well.
Instagram, yep. You could find the Prepper Broadcasting Network on Instagram also, where you'll see my face. I'm pretty much predominantly the driving force over there. So, you know, it's James-centric.
What else? And I know you have something special coming out as well.
Yeah, you know, we do all kinds of stuff. A lot of the hosts are authors, and I'm a writer too. But we have and it didn't really click in my head until we started talking about the show this morning. On Father's Day, I'll be publishing a book called Poems for Men. And it is a collection of personal, it's a collection of Victorian, it's a collection of poetry through the years that I've read. Remember, I told you I wasn't on the football field. I was in the library, in the garage band. But so much of poetry and art is kind of missed on men. And I think with the crisis that men are in right now, a lot of them, I think they're missing out on some really great gems. So we've pulled some of the best that sort of I've always turned to over the years, put it in the book, put some of my own work, some of my friends' work in there. And just trying to get guys to look at something differently because, you know, I talk to a lot of men, Robert, and they lament the things that Shakespeare lamented. You know what I mean? Like all the problems that dudes have today are the problems that dudes have always had. And it seems like I need a pill, I need a this, I need a therapist, I need a that. But when you go back and read Victorian poetry, you read Shakespeare, you read Dante Gabriel Rossetti, you read those guys and you go, they had the same problems I had. Like to a T. The girl, the job, the death, the father is in trouble, the money problem. You know what I mean? So we tried to compile all of that into this this little gift to men and Poems for Men. Look it up.
Man, that's great. And I will put a link, you know, of course, to your website as well. And they can find the book through your website, right?
I'm sure. If not, Poems for Men at Amazon on Father's Day. Maybe a little lead up. It might be out early release too.
Anything else that we didn't cover?
No, I mean, that's it. Like I said, you'll get a healthy dose if you listen to the podcast. So if you like what you're hearing, just check us out, Prepper Broadcasting Network.
Definitely will. And look, James, I appreciate you spending time coming on here. And I know I am a virgin with this. I have no idea really with prepping, but it's something, again, that I've always found appealing. And, you know, when you reached out, I was like, gosh, this would be so interesting to talk about. And I just appreciate you taking time.
Oh, I appreciate you, Robert. And you got some of the pieces of the puzzle already. So
maybe one or two. That's it. But at least I'm not starting from scratch.
That's true.
So
I remember that.
But hey, look, again, James, thank you. And thank you all for listening to Dad to Dad's podcast. You can find us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, as well as most platforms. You can also find us on YouTube and Instagram. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. And please leave a comment. I read every one of them, and I really enjoy receiving your feedback as well as topics for future shows. And we will talk to you next time.